I'd always prided myself on doing whatever music came my way, whatever interested me. Balinese Gamelan, I'd go to Bali. Improvisational music, contemporary music, minimalism, whatever it is, if it was interesting to me, I would do it. And it was just like the one thing I wasn't doing was the music that I spent thousands of hours listening to and thinking about.
Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to the Clarinet Podcast, the show for clarinetists looking for in-depth, career-accelerating conversations about all that's neat for clarinet. On today's show, I'm joined by Evan Ziporyn, who was featured way back in 2016 on one of the first episodes of the podcast. We discuss his latest album project, which features some pop arrangements of music that he loves, why we both love and appreciate popular music, and how we come to understand and appreciate music. And of course, we also talk about his latest work, which is, or maybe not latest, but one of his more recent works, arranging David Bowie's album Blackstar for a cello ensemble, and even how he met David Bowie, who actually sought him out after learning of his work with Bang on a Can. So yes, you heard that right. David Bowie heard about Evan Ziporyn's work with Bang on a Can and sought him out to speak to him about it, which is a really interesting story to discuss here on the podcast. And it's so interesting because a lot of these stories end up coming up when I'm talking to these guests. I have no idea all the amazing experiences and stories that people sort of have hiding just below the surface. And it's one of the reasons I love doing this program and also returning to previous guests to get even more from previous conversations. So speaking of previous conversations, do head back and check out Evan Ziporyn's original episode of the podcast. We talked about his original recording of Steve Reich's New York Counterpoint, which we allude to this at the beginning, but he actually recorded in a snowstorm, which was a really interesting story as well. So before we get started, I'd like to thank our season sponsors and supporters for making the show possible, and you for taking the time to listen to today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to Clarinet wherever you get your podcasts, tell your musical friends, students, and colleagues, and I hope that you enjoy the show. As musicians, we're always looking to improve our playing and understanding of music, but we are often hesitant to work on the business and marketing side. If you're looking to make more money teaching, fill up the gaps in your schedule, and find ideal clients to work with who leave you energized instead of drained after a day of teaching, you need to check out clarinetist Kelly Reardon's Outside the Box community. Get a free 30-minute consultation and personalized recommendations from Kelly by mentioning Clarinet when you register at kellyreardon.com. That's KELLYRIORDAN.com. Also, you might want to check out her recent podcast episode with me, number 174 of the Clarinet Podcast. The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code Clarinet at bakunmusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase, and try the Bakun Q-Series or Protégé clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at bakunmusical.com and use code Clarinet at checkout. So I'm back today with the wonderful composer, conductor, and clarinetist Evan Ziporyn, who's coming to us today from Boston, and this is his second appearance on the Clarinet Podcast. Evan, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Sean. It's great to be back.
So, it's so funny. Before we got started with the interview today, we were talking about how long it's been since the first one, and also how kind of strange it is that the world has changed so much, because I remember when I first started this, I think podcasting, I'm not sure if it was new, but it was definitely new to clarinetists, I think. And I used to send out these really elaborate instructions on like how we're going to conduct the interview and what's going to happen. And it's funny because I just don't seem to have to do that anymore, because people seem to just know what a podcast is and how it's going to work and all that. So, but I'm wondering, so in the past 6 years since we first chatted, a lot of stuff has changed clearly in the world and with everything. But what have you been up to? How has your career shifted? And just let's get a really big update, I guess. It's been a long time.
Well, there've been, as with everybody, there's been a couple big shifts, because whatever I thought I was doing before March of 2020, came to a grinding halt, and then, like everybody else on the planet, had to reinvent, and that was kind of a healthy thing. So when last we spoke, I think that I had just started getting involved with conducting this orchestra that I was founding, the ambient orchestra, and I was really following that path pretty intensively between then and 2020. So we did this large David Bowie project where I made a cello concerto out of Blackstar, his last album, and did that in several different venues, including Central Park in New York and with the Barcelona Symphony and at the Adelaide Fringe Festival. got a really fantastic group of young musicians in Boston together to work on it. We really were starting to feel like we had something going. I mean, things go slow with a group that size, but we had this amazing concert in February of 2020 down at Strathmore Hall in the DC area. And, the place was packed and people really were responding and we were all psyched. And it sort of occurred to us that like half the group had these really bad colds or flus, but whatever, we still all went out for beers afterwards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, then the world all came crashing down. Suddenly, playing music with anybody, let alone with an orchestra, was completely impossible. So, there was, as with everybody, a lot of reinvention. But what happened with me was I rediscovered the love of playing the instrument. So I really got deeply back into just practicing in a way that I hadn't really since my Bang in a Can days, which had ended in 2012. And was also rediscovering the music that I really loved from my youth that I'd never gotten the chance to play, which was pop music. So I started making these multi-clarinet arrangements for bunches of clarinets. And it was sort of started as well, this is the kind of thing I can do at home alone, But then I just really got into it so that by the time things started opening up, I basically had an album of multi-track clarinet material. So I released that. And then out of the blue, the Philip Glass people got in touch with me and said, hey, we just found this old Philip Glass piece for 3 clarinets that seems to never have been performed. You want to take a look at it? And I was like, yeah.
I do, yeah.
So that was in August of last year. And they, like a year, like 14 months ago, they sent it to me. They told me about it in early August. They sent it to me about the 15th of August. I went into the studio with it a week later and recorded it, and just put it out a few months ago, and I've started performing that. And then I thought, well, that was super fun and awesome. So I've done and of course I had done Steve's piece years earlier, New York Counterpoint. I figured, okay, well, I've done Reich and Glass. I really should do a Terry Riley clarinet piece. So there isn't one. So I contacted him. He's in Japan now. And I was like, hey, would you consider writing me a piece? And so now we're working on that. He's written the piece and I'm recording that and working on that. And I'll be premiering this kind of large work of Terry Riley's next month at Ars Musica in Brussels.
That's fantastic. I didn't know those last 2 things. So I'm so glad we connected because I love both of those composers. I actually had Sam Sadaginski on the show a couple months ago. He's now playing with this Philip Glass ensemble, of course, out in New York, I guess. But that's really cool. I didn't realize that Terry had never written a solo clarinet piece.
Well, he's done a lot of saxophone work because he was a saxophonist himself. So and I had actually done an arrangement of Poppy No Good, which is one of his kind of major kind of phase pieces for saxophone. And a lot of his pieces are open orchestration. So, a lot of people have played Terry's music. They've played in C or they've played other pieces of his. But and I've played other pieces. I've commissioned a gamelan piece from him, and I did in C many, many times, and other pieces by him. Was involved in making his piece Autodreamographical Tales into an ensemble piece, but no, never a clarinet piece. So now I have one, and now eventually once I let go of it, the world will
everyone else can have it too. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
I look forward to hearing it. I'll have to check out that Glass one too. I hadn't heard of that, but so last time we talked too, it does seem so long ago, but I must have just finished my CD project where I recorded some Glass pieces. I was playing marimba. I'm not sure if I ever sent you that, but I'll have to.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that. Well, this one's called Best Out of 3, and you can find it, everywhere you find music these days. It's what I did with it was I did it as he wrote it, which was it's marked quarter equals 120, so I recorded it that way. And then I thought, and this is actually something Sam might have talked about himself, because this is a process that the Glass Ensemble goes through all the time. That they play his music and they go, it's good, but it should be faster. So then I redid it at 160 and then just decided to release both because it's actually a really interesting piece at both tempi.
It's funny you say that because I actually sometimes feel the same way with Glass, but then I find that almost the reverse happens when you slow it down. Like it gets interesting again in its own way at slower speeds or higher speeds. Like it always just kind of works. But yeah, at medium tempos, it doesn't seem to it doesn't seem to work like that. It's faster or slower is always really cool, but then in the middle, it's an interesting type of music because it doesn't really latch on to you unless it's very rhythmic and you can kind of hear those interplays.
It's just him and Bach that I find that, that basically every tempo, you can make every tempo work, or at least, like, whereas, like with Steve Reich's music or basically every other composer on the planet, like really, including my own, generally, the tempo is the tempo. I mean, there's a little range, but you can't just play the Moonlight Sonata, at Bavaci tempo or, you
Yeah.
know,
Well, the tempo is almost part of the texture sometimes, where it gives like, and especially so we'll dive into pop music a little bit in a second, but it's like that with pop music, especially like when you hear a certain drum beat or a certain guitar riff, like if it's not on tempo, it's not that song, you know.
oh yeah.
Before we move on, though, I found what you said so interesting about the pandemic kind of shutting things down, but also opening up. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, because like some people, like myself, I pretty much shut down and just stayed shut down for the whole time. Like we have two kids now, and it was a difficult, long experience. But I'm interested to get inside of the heads of those people who did sort of find motivation and were able to come out of this with, in your case, it sounds like several album projects and new pieces. And so do you have any like rituals for motivation? Are you big into like meditation, or what's your sort of secret sauce?
I I intend on having, I'm being big into meditation, but I'm like one of these. More my thing is Tai Chi, but I go through thing which I started doing in the early '80s because I was like a twitcher, like my leg was constantly shaking. But then I found it applied to all sorts of parts of my life. But I'm like one of these people where like I did Tai Chi like every day for like, a decade and still didn't feel like I was an expert at it. Still felt like I was really a beginner. Wouldn't have ever dreamed of teaching it or anything like that. And then it fell away and it would come back. And I did re-find it again during the first part of the lockdown. And I've kind of lost it again. But so, I mean, I don't want to make any claims to anything be the otherwise. I mean, I do know for me that like just doing a little bit of something every day starts to instill better habits. That's a really obvious truth. But like whatever it is, practicing or composing or what, like that sort of beating your head against a wall period where it's like, I don't have anything to say. This feels terrible. You just have to do that. And then it starts feeling better and you want to do it more. But it's so easy to fall off of that. And then it's just as hard to find it again. So I guess I feel like you have to be easy on yourself, like just because you haven't been doing it for a week, a month, 6 months, a year, whatever, doesn't mean you can't start again. It also, there's a very particular type of person that never has those fallow periods. And I'm not one of them. I have a lot of them. But look, for me, the lockdown happened that year. I had been conducting the MIT Symphony because the regular conductor, Adam Boyles, who's a great conductor and a great guy, was on leave. And it was just like, wait, I can do an orchestra. And I was really interested to see what I could do with like just a straight out of the box classical orchestra. Like, how could I find an interface between what I was interested in and what they did? How could I connect with, the type of people that want to play in orchestras who are obviously really fine musicians, but normally into music that is not my focus. And that was a great adventure. And when that just ceased, like literally, like the lockdown happened the day before one of our concerts. And, I still had the responsibility as a teacher for these 60 people who were still in my class. Suddenly I had an orchestra class, but it was like an online class where we didn't even know what Zoom was. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. And it would have been, we were at least, I don't know if people remember this, but there was so much chaos at that time in terms of like that it would have been perfectly fine to say like, you can't do an orchestra online. So we're just abandoning that class. Nobody would have minded. But I really felt like I needed to connect with these students for at least the rest of the semester because their worlds were thrown far more out of whack than mine was. I have a nice house in the woods. I'm in a happy marriage. I got a dog. And I was fine with I mean, didn't like the world going to hell in a handbasket. And obviously it was horrible when anybody I knew got sick or people died that, but like on a personal day-to-day level, the lockdown, at least for the first few months, was totally fine with me, you know. But I felt like I really needed to kind of keep these students connected to music, connected to each other. And so I thought, like, what is it, as opposed to like trying to do something like, rehearse. I mean, we also tried to do that. Everybody was trying to figure out how you were going to play online. And that was a very frustrating and sort of, quixotic experience. But I just thought, like, what are you trying to really instill? What are you doing in an orchestra, like particularly a student orchestra? Well, you're trying to make people connect to music. You're trying to make people connect to each other. You're trying to like improve musicianship skills. You're trying to improve, technical skills of one sort or another. You're trying to, instill appreciation of the repertoire. And you can do all that in other ways. So I just began to think of other ways to do that. So, sort of similar to what you were doing with your podcast, I was like, okay, you're all going to get these microphones, you know, and we're all going to learn how you record. Basically, I had all these classical musicians who never thought to learn this stuff. Like I was teaching them recording techniques, teaching them, multi-tracking, and we were putting pieces together that way. But I also didn't want to do the sort of Hollywood Squares thing to a click track. Like I really wanted to try to do like organic performances. So we did things like I used like ambient pieces, or everybody would record their track in isolation, then I'd put them together and mix them. And I had students who had certain other skills do remixes of stuff. A bunch of kids did Beatles arrangements, for subsets of the orchestra. And then I made like a really like specific like tempo map of the slow movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, and just and figured out this whole way of recording it where like it was sort of like tag team. So like I would set the tempo and then have like the principal players like record to this dynamic tempo. So it actually had kind of natural oscillations in it. We'd mix that, then we'd send it to the rest of the strings. They'd record to that, and we said, and so we built the music in a way that actually involved listening to each other and not just everybody playing to a click, sending it to kind of central casting and having it put together. So, and then by the time that ended, I also did a couple other kind of interesting sort of MIT oriented like online music projects. So then when that ended, that's about when I started feeling like, oh, now I can start doing something of my own. So just started doing a lot of clarinet playing and arranging and things like that. But part of it was also the freedom of not having deadlines and performances. And the kind of weird surprise for me, and I didn't miss that at all. I didn't miss performing. And I and and I would start to think about like how much of the experience of being a performer involved doing all sorts of things that you didn't particularly want to do, like sit in a, you know, stand in a line to get on an airplane, or
Yeah.
like, like figure out what to do with the other 22 hours of the day, or, like and maybe it had been because I had been on the road so much, for the 20 years previous, that at least for me, at least for then, I didn't miss it. And I definitely realized also that I wanted to start making music just because I wanted to make it. And like that, just removing that whole thing about what anybody else thought about it was an interesting challenge, and also involved times going like, well, maybe I don't want to do anything. So that's, and what emerged from that was the Pop Channel record, which I ended up feeling great about. But even with that, as I was doing it, I wasn't even thinking of releasing it. It was more just like, this is a kind of fun, interesting thing to do, and a way to connect to music that I really like. And it was only because certain people who I really respect, when I'd send it to them, just like, hey, I did this. What do you think? They'd go, I like this a lot. Like, you really should put this on. I'm like, really? I don't know if I can do that. Like, can I really put out a record of just like covers of like obscure 70s rock tunes, on the clarinet? Like that is nothing the world is waiting for. But
But why not? Yeah, why not?
yeah, and I'm really glad I did. I mean, it's not like it set the world on fire in terms of streams or sales or anything like that, but I just feel really good about it. And the times that I have performed it, it's just felt great to be on stage doing it. And it also just felt really fulfilling to, it was like a gap in your vision that you don't know is there. Because I'd always prided myself on doing whatever music came my way, whatever interested me. Balinese gama, I want to go to Bali, learn to play jazz, like get involved with improvisational music, contemporary music, minimalism, whatever it is, like if it was interesting to me, I would do it. And it was just like the one thing I wasn't doing was the music that I spent, thousands of hours listening to and thinking about as a kid and throughout my life. And it just felt like saying, well, there are no clarinets in pop music was not a sufficient answer to that.
I love that though, and I love how you're kind of focusing on what you want to do. And after some months, I actually felt the same thing slipping away, like the expectation of society to do things. And I can't say in a lot of ways I missed a lot of performing either, because I found that a lot of the performing I was doing was not the pieces I wanted to do. It was like I got called for XYZ gig, and I would go play that piece, or go do that teaching thing, or whatever. And it wasn't really like stuff that was to the core of kind of what I wanted to be doing. And so after, I think it was about a year, I actually started taking some guitar lessons and working on my own personal songwriting projects and some producing and stuff like that too, which I'm, kind of very new with, but it's also very interesting to be working on with someone who's motivating in that way, who any one of my, I feel like, local colleagues wouldn't, want to work with me on that level or understand those kind of interests and things like that. So it's nice because you're able to get out and kind of, I guess I had this experience with podcasting for years, but like talking to people who aren't in your direct vicinity. So the whole Zoom thing really kind of opened up the world for a lot of people, I think. And suddenly they're talking to, like, I never would have thought of taking guitar lessons from a guy in LA. Like, why am I doing that? And so it just was kind of interesting, but it's been kind of fun. But part of this, actually, one reason that I was excited you got back in touch with me is because, with doing a lot of this writing, it's funny that he said to me at one point, like, oh, well, what about instrumentation, fleshing out some of these songs? And I'd never thought about using my clarinet in the music for some reason. And I don't know why, kind of same as you. I mean, it's not really normally used in kind of, singer-songwriter, pop writing, whatever kind of stuff. So I started looking for some albums just randomly that kind of had more kind of horns on them, I guess you could say. And the algorithm on Apple Music somehow led me to Blackstar, which I realized I'd never listened to at all. So I'm kind of a late Bowie fan, but as soon as I put it on, I was like, man, this is incredible. So I think that we spoke actually, like, I can't remember. I think it was March 2016. So back then Bowie must have, released that album a couple months ago, but we never talked about it because it wasn't something I was into. And then just after that, you must have done this project. So I was going through iTunes, or Apple Music, I guess they call it now, and I was listening to, Blackstar incessantly. And suddenly I started looking for, as I always do, I look for covers or other versions, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I looked closer at the cover one time, and I was like, wait, Evan did this.
You're right.
So I was like,
oh, that's
no
good.
way. I'm getting to kind of discover that,
Oh, well, that's fantastic because, that it's nice that you found it without knowing it was me and still liked it. So thanks.
Well, yeah, because I was listening and I was like, this is really interesting. I'm so glad that there's a version like this that's kind of, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I always love to listen to covers of songs as I'm listening to songs, because I find sometimes it sort of lets you unfurl it like an onion more, like, okay, this is what that person heard in it, or this is how it could be reimagined, and the same reason I like live versions, especially Radiohead songs. Like, they have a song called The National Anthem, which the album version is very kind of strange and horns heavy, but the live version is like syncing with radio and a bunch of weird stuff. And they have totally different energies, but then you can listen back and forth and kind of hear it collaborating a bit, if you will. But so I guess that's just kind of my intro to how I got back into your Blackstar after 6 years of not realizing it really even existed. But I wanted to look for that kind of music that had horns. So if you're listening, you haven't checked out Bowie's Blackstar, definitely do it. It's with a guy named Donnie Mccaslin and his band who worked with Bowie. And it's just like a lot of saxophone heavy, and in a nice way, not in like a because it can be saxophone in pop music can come across as, what's that song everyone always plays, the the one, but it's actually very tastefully done, very well done, really kind of contemporary, jazzy at times, and other times just like straight pop, and it's a cool album. But I want to talk to you a little bit about like sort of your love for not only Bowie but other pop artists. I find that sometimes it's tough for classical or non-pop musicians to find kind of a passion in that or an interest or to accept it almost. But I've always been really interested in it, and I can tell that you are too. And I'd like to just hear a little bit about your experience with Blackstar and Bowie and working with Donnie, which you had the chance to do, it sounds like, as well, and just all that Blackstar stuff.
Okay, well, yeah, sure. So I had been a Bowie fan actually when I was a teenager. My father bought a small record store in Evanston, Illinois. Actually, bought it's somewhere else, and then we moved it to Evanston, Illinois, where I lived. And it was called Slip Disc, and it was right next door to this little club called Amazing Grace, which was this amazing, as the name implies, it was like I don't know how I could have been so lucky as to have that place fall into my life. So Amazing Grace had been started by these Northwestern students who had been putting on concerts at Northwestern, and then they graduated. And they basically got this little storefront. It's like a double storefront, like in the equivalent of a strip mall, and cleared it out, put in a really good sound system, no seats, great piano. And Evanston was a dry town at that time. People don't remember that or care, but so as a result, they couldn't serve liquor, and that meant that wasn't like other jazz clubs where it was kind of forbidding for a teenager to go. So it was kind of like a hippie hangout, and they had everybody there. They had the coolest lineup because it was basically like ECM was just kicking in. So they had Keith Jarrett as a soloist and with his quartet. They had Pat Metheny right after his first couple records came out, Gary Burton, all those guys, plus Odetta, all these people from the kind of folk and blues scene. Because I worked in the record store next door, I got to actually meet all these people and hang out with them and, see multiple sets. So when Keith Jarrett was there, I was going to like 2 Keith Jarrett sets a night for 4 days, and McCoy Tyner, Mingus played there. I mean, it was just insane. Eddie Harris. And in the record store, we opened this record store fall of 75, I think. I may have the year wrong, but within rapid succession, Blood on the Tracks, Young Americans, Earth, Wind and Fire, That's the Way of the World. Like just this explosion of amazing music was coming out. Like, I mean, to start working on a record store when Blood on the Tracks and Wish You Were Here came out, and that being your first real exposure to Dylan or Pink Floyd, or et cetera, it was just mind blowing, and that I was also, so it's this weird sort of firewall where at the same time in school, I was being introduced to Ives and Steve Reich and Alvin Lucier and Stravinsky. I had this whole other education going on in this really amazing period of rock music. And Bowie put out the what are now called the Berlin trio of records, but which just came out in startling quick succession, Low and Heroes and Lodger. And I was really deeply into those records. And as a result, I was a Bowie fan. I really wasn't, like, I was too young and too straight of a kind of person in general to kind of get into like the transgressive, like, Ziggy Stardust stuff at that time. So for me, it was more, of course, like the Berlin records were like him, either coked out or trying to get over being coked out, and
Yeah.
were kind of deeply dark, strange records. But I love those records. So then I was just a Bowie fan, straight up from then on in. And that carried through for a long time. Then, as with a lot of people, I kind of lost it. And even to the point where, like, toward the end of my Bang in a Can days, he actually got a little bit interested in our band, and he came to some of our concerts, and he booked us for a festival he was curating in New York. And so I met him a couple times.
No way.
Yeah, I got the photos to prove it.
You have to send me these photos. This is I didn't expect this.
I talked about Nankara with Bowie, because
Wow.
when we played at Zankel Hall, he wanted to come. He asked if he could enter via backstage because he didn't want to have to deal with sitting in the audience, So he just came and hung out, and we just talked about Conlon Nat Carroll.
This is
And
crazy.
yeah, but I mean, don't get me wrong. He didn't give me his phone number. We
Well,
didn't hang out.
still though,
Like,
that's amazing. Like Bowie was interested in your music, like.
yeah, yeah. On the other hand, he didn't call us to play on his record. He called Donnie, and so. But even at that time, like I wasn't so into the music he was doing at that period, and I kind of thought like because that happens you know, with rock stars, it happens with anybody. There's periods that you get into, and then they seem to whatever thread you had with them seems to be lost, and you find it again. But what happened was with Blackstar, and I don't know if we talked about this or not, because I'm not sure I knew how significant that record was going to be for me when I spoke to you. But in January of 2016, my wife Christine Southworth and I had been at this artist residency in Florida at the Hermitage, which is on the beach in Sarasota, south of Sarasota. And there was this Canadian writer there named Jonathan Garfinkel, who's now a good friend. And when you get in those situations, you try to find commonalities, and then maybe cooking, or they may be like, playing darts or something, but one of the things just the people around us all kind of found to talk about was David Bowie. And Jonathan was really into David Bowie. And this was January of 2016. And we're all staying in this little place. And he's just talking about Bowie, this, Bowie, that. And he's like, Bowie's got these two new videos out there, very dark. He looks very sick. He's, I mean, it's weird. It looks like they made him up like he's a terminally ill person, And he was talking about these. And then the record came out, and we were actually staying in two halves of a house. There was like a duplex of a house right on the beach. And it was a kind of rickety old Florida house. And he was alternating Blackstar with a Kanye West record. That's all he was listening to over and over again. And to the point of like, oh, this is really annoying. Like we're musicians here. We're trying to work. We got this guy but then I started practicing, like the Bowie was coming through the floorboards. I hadn't actually even heard it, but I started practicing to it coming through the floorboards. Just like, I'm just going to improvise to what I'm, what's coming, what I'm hearing from the next room. And I was doing that for several days, right? And then he left. Jonathan left because his residency was over. And then the day he left was the day Bowie died. And so Jonathan left, and I went to sleep, and I woke up at 1 a.m. and I looked at my phone, and I had this phone alert that said, British rock star David Bowie has passed away. And I thought it was a dream because Bowie had just been on so many, that had been what we were all talking about. Everybody has their experience with, kind of icons dying, but that was my Bowie dying experience. And so it was so present for me. And so what happened was that we're just wandering around in a daze, and like, what's going on? And like reconnect, suddenly this process where, you're spending like all day, like watching YouTube videos of David Bowie and of imitations of David Bowie and, cover versions, exactly what you were describing, just like, deep dive into David Bowie. And then people started contacting me, like old friends. I was just thinking about you as I was thinking about when we heard this record, and and everybody, and I realized like everybody was kind of connecting about this, just using that as like this, and as this way of realizing some era was over. Because David Bowie, from my generation, I'm 62, right? So, I remember the first time I heard the Beatles, but the Beatles broke up early, and I definitely, but Bowie was just always there. And he was so much what he represented as an artist, even if you didn't like this record or that record, like just the way in which he kind of went about living his life artistically and doing his work artistically was just such a huge, part of the atmosphere. So I got back up to Boston a couple weeks later, and I was realizing like that classical musicians, I suppose this is of a thread with the Pole Pop Channel record eventually, but did not have an outlet to express, like if you had a band, then okay, let's do Life on Mars or Heroes or whatever, like there was a way to do
Like some cover songs or something like that. Yeah.
yeah right, but for classical musicians, there wasn't. And so actually, it was another friend of mine who just kind of said, I don't, why isn't anybody doing those Philip Glass Bowie symphonies? So I thought, like, well, wait, I like teach at a university that's in winter session, and I have access to 1,000-seat hall, and I could actually like put something together quite quickly, and we could do it as like a cancer benefit. So he died of cancer. And I'll just, I talked to the glass people, and they, agreed to let me use the music for a really reduced fee. And basically, I just sort of put the word out. This was January of 2016. Like, I'm going to put this together. Here's the rehearsals. Here's the concert. Whoever wants to play, let me know. And I just figured I'd take whoever I got. But, some of the best freelance musicians in Boston responded, because I knew them from Boston Modern Orchestra Project or just from being around here so long. And it was more just that everybody felt this way. It's like, oh, wait, here's a way to do something to kind of channel these feelings. And so within like 3 weeks, we had this like 80-piece orchestra, and we had the music, and we had a hall, and we had a structure, and we did the Low Symphony, and we did Hero Symphony, and it was kind of like it felt really cathartic. So that's what started me in that whole thing. So part of it was, well, that felt really good, but the other part of it was like, wow, it's cool to have an orchestra.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like, this is awesome. I got to keep this going. So meanwhile, I work a lot with Maya Beiser, the cellist, who had been in Bangor Camp with me for the first decade of that group. And we had done a record several years earlier called Uncovered, which had been all cover tunes that I'd arranged for her. I produced the record and did the arrangements. And I was looking for a new project to do with her. And, Blackstar is such a unique record. And like you were saying when you were describing it, it has these jazz elements, but it's not really jazz. It doesn't really sound like any other record. The sound world is really unique.
That's one thing I like about it, by the way, is it's one of the most unique sounds I
Yeah,
think I've ever heard.
yeah, it's incredible. And then I was thinking about Bowie's voice and like realized, he's got, about the widest range since Ima Sumac of any singer, and it basically is the same range as, well, as a bass clarinet or as a cello,
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was looking for this project to do with Maya, and I just woke up. This would have been like March of 2016, and I woke up, thought like, it could be a cello concerto. Wouldn't have to change a note, like not like I love the Low Symphony, and I like the Hero Symphony, and I haven't come to terms with the Lodger Symphony, but I totally like get the transformative thing where you take a piece as the basis for a piece. But I thought Blackstar, I just want to do Blackstar, like start at the beginning and go to the end, and just change the sound world, which is already perfect as it is, but just reimagine it on a larger palette. So Maya agreed, and we put that together, and that's how that project started. And the other thing about that project was this was like the only time this has ever happened to me where, because usually what happens is you have these ideas and you go, oh, this is an amazing idea, this will be great, and then it'll take us all over the world, and then you do it and then it's over.
Yeah.
And in this case, like, I'm a terrible, like, the way you're supposed to do things is that you're supposed to build the infrastructure first, right? And I never do that because I'm just too impatient. I just want to do the project, right? So we set this thing up. I didn't have permission from the Bowie people. We eventually got it, but I didn't have it. I didn't have a booking agent or a manager, because I don't, and not out of principle, but because I'm too whatever random to do that. But I just thought, oh, we'll do this, and somebody will hear it, and next thing we know, we'll be taking it to Europe and all over the world, and so we did it. Like 2 weeks later, the Barcelona Symphony found us on Facebook and said, "Yeah, we heard about this, and we want you to come do it here."
Wow.
And it's like, really? Okay, that's So we did that, and then we did get organized, because then a really wonderful booking agent named David Middleton contacted us and said, "I think I can get you some gigs doing this." And then a similar thing happens, like, well, how am I going to get an orchestra to tour? And I thought, I could do this as a class like with one of the conservatories in town, and still pay the players, but they'll be happy to do it because they're students and it'll be a good experience for them. And so I thought, well, no, nobody will ever agree to it, but I'll see if I can set up a meeting. So I went to the Boston Conservatory and I contacted the dean there. It was almost like a due diligence in like learning how to hear no. Like the purpose of the meeting was for me to go in and be told that they couldn't do it. But I went in and I explained the idea, and they said, "Sounds great. Let's do it. How do we do it?" And I was like, "What?" Like I had no idea what to do next. Like,
Wasn't expecting that. Yeah.
you're right. Okay, let me get back to you. So, and again, I have to say that it's great to have like an incredibly well organized and smart partner in your life, because Christine Southworth, my wife, really took the ball on, and she herself is a composer and an artist and had better things to do. But she took over as kind of producer of it, and so we got this great group together. It was part of the Boston Conservatory like modern music program, and basically part of what they did that fall was they rehearsed with me, and then we went on tour, and it was really great, fantastic. It was amazing also to realize that like there is progress in the world, at least in terms of like musicians, because you were mentioning before classical musicians and pop music used to be, you could not write certain rhythms for classical musicians to play. Like they could play them, but it really would not sound good. It would not sound like, just simple things like a 4/3 or like a certain kind of syncopation or a certain kind of articulation. You just could not do it. It would just sound dorky. But 20-year-old musicians today, at least these 20-year-old musicians, and some were 25, and I had a couple of like friends who were older as well, but they did not have a problem with these rhythms and these phrases, and they did not have a problem with me saying, like to the flutist, like, yeah, make that sound weirder, get more overtones in your sound, like, make the sound kind of crackle or break up, like they were game for anything. And they also did not, and then they would leave that rehearsal where they were doing Bowie and they'd go do Fernie Howe, or they'd go do they'd do recitals where they were doing Steve Reich and Milton Babbitt. Like those wars were irrelevant to them, and I'm sure they have wars of their own, but like just seeing the skill level of these players was really inspiring, and seeing their openness to doing this kind of thing was really inspiring. And plus it was just super fun to take a bunch of people that age on the road, most of whom had never done, and look, it was, we did like 5 concerts. It wasn't like, getting on a bus and like going around to Lollapalooza or something, it was like, it still took a particular kind of presenter to do this project. But anyway, so that's the story. And then it was still going, it was still picking up momentum, but now we're just, now it's been over 2 years. Like, it was just dead. It just got killed by the pandemic. And then it took a long, and actually, sadly, maybe not sadly, because maybe they're happy. Like a lot of the people in the band, some are playing in symphonies across the country, but others have gotten out of being musicians as their primary profession because there just was no work.
Well, this has happened to a lot of people from the pandemic. I personally know locally many people who they pursued kind of a second career path because they had to during the pandemic, and I think they've sort of decided not to go back. Maybe they've realized that they're more comfortable. I mean, fair enough. You're more comfortable making some money and getting your needs met, and maybe some people also like started a family and things like that. So, I mean, it's been very rough.
Yeah, it happens, and so, like I said, sometimes it's not a bad thing, but yeah, and I don't really know. I mean, I do know that like some of the established freelance players, at least in Boston, have now, it's all come back, and they seem to be busier than ever. And they've also, because the other thing I've been doing, I don't know how much if you want to hear about it, but what another totally bizarre thing that came out of this was that like I said, I had a couple of like more peers playing like the principal string parts, and 2 of them, this violinist Sasha Callahan and her husband, cellist Leo Iguchi, turned out to have this really great thing going on where they had started this ensemble called the Sheffield Ensemble that just does house concerts. And they had really, I had not realized, like they built it up to, they're doing like 50 or 60 concerts a year in the Boston area of chamber music. and it's a good portion of their income. And they have a not-for-profit, and they fundraise, and they just took control of their musical life. I mean, these are basically like just very high quality freelance musicians, classical players, who figured out that they just didn't want to be dependent on whoever called them or whatever contractor, and they still do that stuff, right? So they're still running around doing all the regional orchestras and do the Boston Pops and this and that and the other, but they found a way to kind of make it work where they could actually play chamber music, play it multiple times, make and they said to me, hey, let's do a series of concerts together. We'll do Be In, which is a piece of mind for bass clarinet and string quartet. And this is a weird thing to ask you, but would you consider doing the Mozart Quintet with us? And I was like, well, I haven't played it since I was 18. And I haven't played like music, like 19th or 18th century music pretty much since I was 30, but sure.
Yeah.
So that was supposed to happen in the spring of 2020, but then it didn't. And I was like, okay, well, at least I got out of that one. But then it came back this year and we did it. And so I spent the latter part of the spring and the first part of the summer playing that program about 20 times all around Boston, like all in private homes, a couple libraries and things like that. And it was really like a huge discovery for me to play Mozart after not having played Mozart for 4 years. Maybe I was very glad I never got rid of my A clarinet. but but like it was like the opposite side of the pop channel thing, because I just felt like, I mean, I had actively like pushed that way of playing out of my life. And so finding a way back into it was like finding like an extra room in your house that you didn't know you had.
It's so interesting to hear about the house concert idea too, because I remember there's a guest I talked to about, oh, it must have been also about 6 years ago, and it's embarrassing, but I'm forgetting his name. He's a conductor, Steven something. It'll probably come to me, but he was saying basically what you're describing is like, in order to make money off of your own kind of concert series, like you have to play it more than once. Like you plan a program and you book that program in 20 places, and suddenly you've taken your efforts and kind of like in an entrepreneurial way, you've opened it up to so many more people, and it really kind of allows you to build something for yourself. And I think that's a really interesting kind of way to play music, is the house concerts too, because a lot of people they do enjoy that. So how big an ensemble did they take along? You said it was a quintet.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say more than that. I mean, this is the thing that anybody that's in a band knows this, and I knew this from my garage bands of my youth, but then I knew it from Bang Can All Stars, that you don't really play a piece if you play it once. You don't really play a piece if you play it twice or three times. You really need to play a piece over and over again to kind of discover it. It's sort of like what you were saying about listening to various versions of a tune, like just like you don't really know a tune until you've heard a lot of different, until you reach the point where it's just, you're not even thinking about all the like, wait, there's a tempo change here, or what did I do here? Oh yeah, what's marked on the page or whatever, but you're really just inside of it. And the music on the page is just a reminder of something that's actually coming from you and the other players. I mean, I don't want to overstate it. Obviously, you can get something out of a single performance. Don't get me wrong, but there's something you find artistically and emotionally and expressively when you play a piece multiple times, because it's not like it gets fixed. It's like it becomes elastic in a certain way. Like you begin to discover, like it becomes a part of you in a different way.
That's exactly though about listening to music, I find too, and that's why I knew the Bowie record was good, is because I found getting into it very fatiguing, if that makes sense. I don't know if you experienced this, but when I'm listening to a music that I can tell is going to be really good, I often have to listen to it many times, and I often don't listen to the record in entirety. Like if I get hooked, for example, with the Bowie record, like on the first track, I got really into it. I found that I didn't have the energy to get past track 3 until about 2 weeks into listening to the album, because I was like, there's so much here, there's so much going on, and then eventually I would work my way through, and but I find that you open these kind of layers of the music, and if I just listened to it once, I wouldn't have ever had that. So it's surprising that people do prepare music so much and then play a recital and then put it away.
Yeah, it's a weird artifact. It's not natural. I mean, it's a weird artifact of the way music works. But even in teaching, like, just, classes that are more for listening, like I'm teaching now a class on global pop music. And I like say to the students, I'm not going to give you long listening lists. I'm going to give you short listening lists. And I want you to listen to the music a number of times. But also, I mean, this is a little bit harder to explain maybe, but like, I think there's also value in listening to it in different ways. Like, I mean, I think there's like the concentrated, okay, I'm sitting down and I'm listening to this. But then there's also like listening to it when you're driving around or when you're like, you know, vacuuming the house or whatever, just letting it like seep into your consciousness. Because often when you do that, we all have so many filters for what we're listening for that you just miss whole aspects of the music because you're listening for the thing that you heard the last time. And sometimes you need it to hit you. Like, I mean, I'll give you a really good example. So, like I did these non-choral arrangements years ago. My group, Banging a Can, ended up recording on the Blast record I did with them, which was Big, Beautiful, Dark, and Scary. And we played these pieces many, many times. The reason I did them, I'd always liked non-choral, but I was at a dinner party where non-choral was playing in the background, and this one, number 11, came on. And and it was soft in the distance, and I thought it was a weather report track, like, and I thought, wait, I thought we were listening to non-choral. This sounds like weather report. And I wouldn't have ever made that connection if it had even been loud enough for me to know that it was like a player piano. It was just like, this isn't thinking about, oh, there's something else in this music. I had been listening to this one way, but there was something else. And that's what made me want to do the arrangements. It was like, I wanted to bring out some of those other things.
It's interesting to hear someone else describe their kind of listening experience, because like I've always felt that, like, in a way, the more kind of, I don't want to say turned off, but maybe that's what it is. Like when I first listen to something and I can tell it's very like dense or going to take a lot of effort, or that I often don't actually even like it the first time.
Yeah, that can happen.
Like Radiohead Kid A is my favorite album ever, and I remember the first few listens through it, I was like, this is some weird nonsense. Where's OK Computer Part 2? Like, this is just weird. I really didn't like it. And then one day, actually exactly what you described, I used to listen to albums in high school before phones and people just did nothing all the time on their stupid phone. On Friday afternoons, I think it was, I used to come home and just like lay down in bed and kind of almost have a nap, but listen to music. And I would get like almost half asleep sometimes listening to music, and like something in there would just click. And Kid A, I remember I was actually in the car driving with my parents somewhere, going across town or whatever, and it was a late evening, we'd been somewhere, whatever. I happened to kind of nod off in the car, same thing, listening to this music. And I suddenly just got it. I got it all. And
sleeping to music is the best. A friend of mine in college, a flutist named Carol 80, was the person who told me that, because we used to do these all-night concerts every year. And people would go, I don't know, I'm afraid I'll fall asleep. And she just would go, sleeping to music is great. That's fantastic. And also because, I don't know if you have this experience. I have it with writing music, but I also have it with, crossword puzzles or all sorts of things in my life. And actually the Blackstar project itself, where like, if you're staring at like a puzzle, say, or trying to figure out a math problem, and you can't see it, and then you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, I know what that is. I mean, I think sleep does a lot of that work for us, and sleeping to music. So that's my advice to the young listeners out there.
Go to sleep. There's something about that unconscious brain that works, though. Like, so we were talking about my dishwasher, of all things, before this, because we had to reschedule this interview because it broke. But one of the things that happened is I had a weird thing happen where they were supposed to drop off the dishwasher, but in order to drop it off, they had to pick up the old one and throw it out. But the electrician wasn't coming till the next day, and so I was going to have to uninstall this stove, and this dishwasher, and it's hardwired, so I was a little uncomfortable doing it. And anyway, so I screwed around with it for like an hour and a half the night before, and watching videos and getting all freaked out. I was like, I'm just going to go to bed. Woke up in the morning, and 10 minutes before they came to drop off the other one, I just was like, all right, I got to get this out, and I just did it. And it's like I solved it overnight. Like I just knew how to do it because I absorbed the information. And I just was able to just like sit down and just do it.
Absolutely.
And it was weird. Yeah, not just with dishwashers. It can be music. It can be anything. But before we move on from the Blackstar, and then I got a few more questions about your album, and then I got to let you go because it's already been an hour somehow. But what was it like working with Donnie Mccaslin then? Didn't you play a concert with him? Was it the one in Central Park?
Yeah. Well, we didn't. I mean, again, to be fair, I mean, he was. We got asked to do it in Central Park, and obviously we agreed. And then they said, we're going to ask Donnie's group to open. And that's fantastic. So we didn't really meet them until the gig. But at the gig, they finished their sound check, and I wanted to introduce myself to him, and I just told him, love his work, and I was like, would you be willing to play on the encore? And he very graciously agreed, and he did that. So the encore is just an arrangement of Let's Dance, actually. And so he just jammed on it, and he sounded amazing. He's a very, interesting player in his own right. And his music does not sound anything like Blackstar.
Well, some of the later albums, though, they start to, because I guess he was influenced by that writing style. And I've actually really been getting into, it's funny because I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's that one with him, like the pencil in his mouth on the cover. What is it called? Blow or something?
But what I know about him is that he was he was a Jazz Police kind of guy before that project, and
I know what you mean,
that
Jazz Police.
yeah, and it's great that he opened up, and obviously, I mean, but he does things like you said. It does not sound like a jazz saxophone record. It's like a very unique voice on that record. So
It is called Blow, so check it out. But there's a couple of tracks, especially the first and second. They're just awesome, and I guess that the singer on this album, strangely enough, is used to play in a Canadian band called Limb Lifter, and I've seen him open before for another band I like called Matthew Good, and I was like, this is so weird. It's like worlds are just colliding everywhere. It's so strange, really, really interesting. So tell me about, and then we should let you go here. But your other album of pop tunes. So like, is there something else planned with this? I mean, are you going to record some more kind of contemporary pieces, or I'd love to hear some Radiohead.
I'm not sure. Like I said, it was kind of accidental that I kind of went, oh, wait, I have a record here, and I'm sending it to people, and then them liking it, and then Big Ears asked me to do it there, which was great. So that was kind of my like reemergence into the world. I have started making some more, but the thing is, like, you put so much time and effort and frankly money into these things, and it is worth it in its own right, like I said, but it's just so difficult to make a dent with, and so I'm not really sure what I'm gonna do next. I'm trying, honestly, like, I mean, I did the glass. I'm really happy about it, but we just put that out as kind of an EP. It's 2 tracks. One is 12 minutes and one is 10 minutes. Doing the Terry piece. I was commissioned by Brussels Arts Musica to write a bass clarinet duet, which I just sent off to the other bass clarinetist, Benjamin Monreal, who I'm looking forward to working with. And I'm doing some duos also with a Dutch bass clarinetist, Fee Schuten. But like, I'm trying to get away from the album as the medium now, because it clearly is not operative anymore.
I was just going to ask you about that. Like, do you find that with Spotify has enabled that? I think. And I used to find it like really negative, and now I think I'm warming up to the fact that it might actually be more creative to not have to feel pressured to write an hour of music just to put out some music.
Well, it just is what it is. I mean, for some reason, the album seemed really natural to me in my generation, and it, I don't know if I'll ever quite get over that. Like 45 minutes. That's or CDs an hour. That's the right length. You don't need any more than that, but you can't do any less. And I will also say, like, with Pop Channel, certainly, and with This Is Not a Clarinet years ago, there was a way in which having that as a sort of, well, you need to hit that bar, you need to get that amount of material, and then you need to think about what order it goes in and how it all sounds together. And that actually, is a great device, just like a concert is a great device. Like, you have to think about the flow of the concert and the sound of the concert. And like, definitely the tracks on Pop Channel were improved by, it's like a wine cellar. Like, you finish the track and like you put it away and you work on some others, and then you go back to it and go, oh, I got to remix this because of the way this one sounds, or what I learned from doing these other things. I don't know how you replace that, but it also has to do with the transparency of the process. Like, I still am of the head that, like, I put out this record, this is my version of it, and that's the way I want you to hear it. I don't want people to hear the outtakes. I don't want people to hear, other versions of it. But that's also not the way the world works anymore.
Years ago, I was releasing tracks on YouTube before it was cool, back in like 2005, of my recital. And I remember I put some on the clarinet B-board, and someone said exactly what you said. Oh, I would take this down. You're a young player, and you're making mistakes in here. And I was like, I know I'm making mistakes. It's my junior recital. I just am excited to get it out there and get some feedback. Like, I don't think it's going to ruin my career, you know?
No, you're ahead of the curve, because now there's no secrets. So trying to deal with the no secrets thing is a different thing. So I don't know. I'm working on some new arrangements, but I actually, the one thing I have taken out of it wasn't just the lockdown, though we certainly learned this from that, but also just what happened with the Blackstar experience before that, is that, and also with other projects that we haven't had time to talk about, is that, like, at least for me, I can't predict what's going to end up being important. Like, and so I'm trying to try less, like, I mean, I'm trying to just like be open to what comes along and really follow the things that I'm interested in. And where, if they lead somewhere, that's great. And if not, okay, well, at least I did that because I wanted to do it, and then do something else, So I don't have any long range plan.
Well, it's like, did you read that book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a, I can't say it here.
I've seen it.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
I read that. It was actually
been
really interesting, because it's like, sometimes you have to care enough not to care. Like if you, it's like hugging someone too hard, like you can hurt them, But it's funny talking about the way you're thinking about the album and the pressure to fill up 45 minutes. Like, I actually experienced exactly this doing my CD project, and it was a problem because I had received funding to do a CD project, and in my mind, a CD is an album that should be around 45 minutes to an hour long. But as I was assembling my project, I realized, upon listening to the takes and stuff, that there was some improvisation on there. And also I was doing the Chick Corea 20 songs and then some Philip Glass pieces. And the album ended up being called Dream Songs. And my idea was that these Chick Corea pieces would be little dreams. And then the beginning was going to sleep and the ending was waking up. And that's kind of what the album arc story was. But people maybe don't understand this, but I also put the children's songs out of order in my own planning of way, and had one of them segue and stuff like that. Anyways, I put a lot of thought into the track listing and stuff, but I ended up cutting some variations and even taking out some of the improv sections, because as I listened to it, I just realized that the instrumentation was like not interesting enough to sustain a full 45 minutes. And I actually think it's a better album at 28 minutes than it would have been at 45.
Yeah, well, good on you, man. It's not easy to do that, but often that's the best thing.
But I was so worried about like the backlash, and nobody cared.
Right, that's the thing.
Yeah, nobody. You worry so much about it. Yeah, and it's just like.
And I would much rather hear a 28-minute album that I love. It was not like, oh, damn it, now I got 17 minutes to kill.
Well, and the short pieces, like I'm just looking at the disc here, pulled it up. Children's Song 11, which I did, is 49 seconds long, but that's how long it is. What am I supposed to do? Just sit there and jam on it for 6 minutes just to get to 45 minutes on the album?
No, it makes no sense. Although there is the famous, like, In a Silent Way was not long enough, and the Miles Davis record, and Teo Macero just like use the material twice. Yeah. So it sounds, sounds like they are.
So for those listening, you'll know that Evan, when he was here last time, we did not do what's called the lightning round. And Evan, you may not have done this or know what this is either. But it's basically some questions I've got at the end for those who support the podcast. Yeah, so if you're listening to the podcast today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, thank you so much for enjoying the show. But you can also get access to an extended version of the show at clarinet.com/join. And you can get your first 30 days free with code TRYGOLD. So use that to try out this episode today and listen to what Evan has to say. But before we go, Evan, is there anything else you'd like to add to the program or direct people to online?
No, I not that I can think of offhand. I'd love to hear what people think of the recent music I've been putting out. So
yes, so check it out at evanziporyn.com, or sorry, it's ziporyn.com, ziporyn.com. He's got a great new website. All his albums and music seem to be up there, and you can check that all out. And thank you again, Evan, for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Sean. Let's do it before another 6 years go.
The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code CLARINET at BakunMusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase, and try the Bakun Q-Series or Protégé clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at BacoonMusical.com and use code CLARINET at checkout. As musicians, we're always looking to improve our playing and understanding of music, but we are often hesitant to work on the business and marketing side. If you're looking to make more money teaching, fill up the gaps in your schedule, and find ideal clients to work with who leave you energized instead of drained after a day of teaching, you need to check out clarinetist Kelly Reardon's Outside the Box community. Get a free 30-minute consultation and personalized recommendations from Kelly by mentioning Clarinet when you register at kellyreardon.com. That's KELLYRIORDAN.com. Also, you might want to check out her recent podcast episode with me, number 174 of the Clarinet Podcast.